We are recording in progress. That's what we're doing. And we are reading from the third chapter. And up to today, we heard a lot about how the importance of setting an example. Krishna said, Yad yad acharati shrestas tatareve tarojana sayat pramanam kurute lokastadana vartate, that whatever great person does, common men follow. And he gave his own example that he has to set an example in doing his duties. But now there's a somewhat of a switch in topic, because Arjuna is asking an interesting question in verse 36. Let me just get my verses up on my computer. And it's so I mean, there's a connection, okay, you're supposed to set the right example, but now Arjuna is going to ask, well, here's one of the biggest challenges to setting the right example. Arjuna uvacha atakena prayuktoyam papam charati purushaha anichan api varshneya balad eva niyojita. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, another name for Krishna, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? And Prabhupada gets very philosophical in the purport. He says, a living entity, as part and parcel of the Supreme, is originally spiritual, pure, and free from all material contaminations. That's everyone on this call. Originally, we're spiritual, pure, and free from all material contamination. Therefore, by nature, he is not subject to the sins of the material world. But when he is in contact with the material nature, he acts in many simple ways without hesitation, and sometimes even against his will. Anyone ever had that experience? You do something and it almost seems like it was out of your control. As such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine, which means very wise, as to the perverted nature of the living entity. So that's perverted because originally we're all pure, and yet we do these sinful things almost against our will. So that's a good example of perversion. Although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act. Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the super soul within, but are due to another cause, as the Lord explains in the next verse. So one thing to point out here is that often in the traditional Vedic system, acting against one's prescribed duties as a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanapastha, Sannyas is a definition of a sinful act. Acting against that. Just 1 second. One Prabhupada disciple asked me if I'm free. Giving class right now. Okay. So now Krishna doesn't hesitate. He gives his answer. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Kama Esha Pura Esha Rajo Guna Samudbhava Mahashano Mahapapam Vidyenam Iha Vairinam. Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion, and later transformed into wrath. That wrath means anger, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. So again, Prabhupada is very philosophical in the purport. When a living entity comes in contact with the material creation, is eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust in association with what? With a mode of passion. In other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath, anger. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Wrath is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If, therefore, the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated to the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. So, I am a co-host. Okay. But I don't see, by the way, is it only the host, or you just don't have the setting where you can break people into groups?
You should be able to, Prabhu. I can make you the host. Here. Just give me 1 second.
All right. Sometimes you have to have that in the setting on Zoom. It's not automatic, but okay, I'm the host now, but that hasn't changed anything now. All right. I was going to ask you to go into groups for a few minutes, but that option is not available. Maybe next week you could try to go into the Zoom settings and allow for breakout groups. So my question to you is, if we'll think about this for a minute, because here it says, how to overcome lust. Therefore, the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated to the mode of goodness. And by what? By prescribed methods of living and acting. Then one can be saved from degradation by spiritual attachment. So my question to you is, if you think about your day-to-day life, what can you do to increase the mode of goodness in your life? I'm assuming that, even though we haven't gotten to the chapter 14, 17, and 18 talk about the three modes, but I assume you're all familiar with the modes. Definitely we're all familiar by having them affect us, but we're also, hopefully you're all familiar by the philosophy behind them. So what could you do practically to increase the mode of goodness in your life? And if you're okay with it, you could either put that in the chat or go off of mute. But what are some things that you could do?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam.
Yes, Braha Prabhu.
Prabhuji, we can take the association of the devotees as much as possible, or plan our day.
What if they're in the mode of passion?
I didn't get you, Prabhuji.
What if the devotees that you're associating are in the mode of passion?
We have to associate with our seniors. That is the.
What if the seniors are in the mode of passion? So I guess we should associate with sattvic people, sattvic devotees. Okay. What else? Prabhu? Were you going to say something else?
Yes, Prabhuji, and plan our schedule in a way wherein end of the day also we are able to take part in some reading session or hear Guru Maharaj lectures. So that way we remain in the in a mode of goodness at least.
Okay, very good. Deepa says reading scriptures. Murari Madhava Prabhu says, well, he's got his hand up, but do you want to go ahead, Murari Madhava? We'll go off of mute. You're still on mute. Oh, there we go.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I think by taking sattvic food and keeping the cleanliness, and of course association of the keeping the environment in around us, which is sattvic in nature, including the association.
Okay, so association and sattvic food. What's an example of sattvic food?
The food which increases the mode of goodness, like milk and dairy products and grains, pure vegetarian food.
Okay, good. Lots and lots of chilies.
Yeah, not spices. Not
spices are okay, but not too many. You know, some spices are very good for your health, but being careful about spices. Yeah.
Yes.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. Chole bhature may not be the best thing for mode of goodness. It's very heavy. Of course, you don't get that so much in South India. It's more of a Punjabi, North India thing. But yeah.
Prabhuji, nowadays we're getting everywhere.
And yeah, pizza is transcendental to all the modes. Yes, Mataji, your hand is up. Oh, you took it down. Oh,
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
yeah.
Like,
How do you? What else?
First and foremost is sadhu sang, like associating with people who are who can help us.
Yeah, next one, because we already heard that one.
Yeah, sadhu sang shastra reading and listening to sadhus. Those things, like if we start the day with those things, then that drags our day in a mode of goodness.
Very good. So people put that money kandam, but really also thanks. But you said here reading and hearing. Mathurapati and Parabhakti said chanting attentively, and then Mataji, what you just said, you put there in the chanting more sincerely. Now, you a lot of you have mentioned spiritual practices, which is true, but those are even transcendental to the mode of goodness. Like keeping your room clean, I struggle with that. I'm in a very small room here, and I have my bed behind me and my desk, and that's all that fits in the room. And so, so all my clothing, all my books, it's pretty cramped because it's just a really, really small room in the Brahmacharya ashram. So it is a challenge for me to keep it neat and clean and tidy because there's not much room for anything.
Yeah. But Prabhuji, like once we will be in spiritual line, as Prabhupada mentioned, cleanliness is the godliness. So that is a part of this. If will be in Krishna. So.
And Prabhupada said that here's one thing you can work on. Prabhupada said that a Brahmin always leaves a place cleaner than when they came.
Okay.
So can you think about that for a minute? So, if you walk by the temple and there's lots of pots and pans, you might say, oh, maybe I should clean some of them. I should leave this room cleaner than when I came.
So serving mode when comes, Prabhuji? Sorry.
What?
When in this serving mode, so most of the mode of goodness comes, like when.
Yeah,
when you will think,
but you're also mentioning spiritual practices. I'm not talking about spiritual practices. I'm talking about sattvic practices, not spiritual. So what can we do for increasing? What can we do to increase the mode of goodness, not transcendence? Of course, we wanted everyone saying chanting around, serving Vaishnava's morning program. Yes, those are all very good. But I'm also talking about practical things to increase the mode of goodness. So one is, what is your car clean? Is your clothes, do you wear nice clothing? It doesn't have to be flashy, but it's neat and clean. Prabhupada once said, first dress, then address, right? And what to speak of the way we treat others. Now you all put serving Vaishnavas, yes, but also the way you treat, a servant in your house, or the way you treat a co-worker at work. Is your exchange with them sattvic? And of course, all the things that you mentioned about spiritual practices. I'm not, of course, yes, Sai Dunham has said, careful in speaking. Very good. So I think you're getting the idea that we want to it's almost like if you think of I don't know, at circuses they have these people that fly on the trapeze, right? And then they have a net hopefully they have a net underneath them, so that if they fall down, they don't kill themselves, they get caught by the net. So we're trying to practice transcendence, Krishna consciousness. The net is the mode of goodness. And so if we fall down from our always remembering Krishna, we want to fall down to goodness instead of passion and ignorance. Does that make sense?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, one thing just I wanted to add here. Even if we, before Krishna consciousness, whenever we didn't know like the terminology serving devotees and all, so whoever coming to our home, no matter if he or she is a beggar or any selling persons, so we should offer water. We should ask them, how are you? Do you want any food? Kind of small thing, compassion, caring for others, not telling lies, or maybe
that's
different ways we can serve others and help others if the needy person. So many things.
Yes, that's sattvic. And then if you add Krishna to it, then you serve them some prasada, or you tell them to chant the holy names. And Ramakrishna Prabhu has made an important point here: not criticizing or finding fault with others. That's very Rajarsic and Tamasic. Okay, so you get the idea. But my point is, we want to make this practical, not just read the theory of Bhagavad Gita and it goes in one ear and out the other, but we want to apply it. So really think about how we can apply being more subtle. And of course, Krishna conscious. Okay, now Prabhupada gets even more esoteric. You could say the Supreme Personality of God had expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss. And the living entities are parts and parcels of this spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. So lust is not just sexual, it's anything that's more I-centered rather than Krishna-centered. So when that attitude of I'm Krishna's servant transforms into I'm the servant of my mind, I'm the servant of my eyes, my ears, my nose, my sense of touch, then we become under the sway of lust. So the material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lusty propensities, and when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, living entities begin to inquire about their real position. So lust, and lust, especially now if we're talking about sexual lust, it's more subtle than anger. A man with lusty intentions can sometimes go undetected, but an angry person, it's almost easy to look at their face, look at their body language and see and notice the anger. But lust turns into anger if it's not, because it cannot be satisfied. In Rajniti, in the instructions for Kshatriyas and diplomacy, it's said there that the enemy can be controlled by words, by gifts, by giving them a position, or finally by danda, punishment. But lust is mahapapam, the mightiest energy, and most of these ordinary methods don't defeat it. So lust arises from the mode of passion, and we should meticulously avoid Rajagun. We should meticulously, very, very carefully avoid mode of passion. And it's not easy because these things totally are in the mode of passion. Or they create the mode of passion in us. We look at, they say the average teenager, I think, looks at their phone 200 times a day or more than that. And the fact that we have, 24-hour television, and I don't know what it's like in India right now, 200 or 300 channels. When I first went to India, there were 2 channels. That was it. And no one had a television in Vrindavan. Finally, someone got one because the Mahabharata was on. But besides that, and it was so much more shanti. The biggest distraction was the newspaper. And now, the internet makes the newspaper look like boring. So the point is, and running around, and you're all in big, most of you I think are in big cities. Cities are in the mode of passion. And if you have children, I don't remember that much because I was living in Vrindavan. But here in America, when I was a child, you would just kind of go out and play with people. Now you have to have, your play dates, and it's all your whole schedule. A 4-year-old's schedule is on their phone, and they say, well, I could meet you next Tuesday at 5:00, but it's like a 5-year-old or something like that. I mean, it's really, we're surrounded by the mode of passion, if not worse, ignorance. So it really takes an endeavor to, for example, to not listen to our mind, to sit down peacefully and chant Krishna's name, even though we want to get up and walk around and check our computer and, I forgot about this big problem that I have, or I got to deal with this today, or get the car fixed. It is to just say, no, this is my time with Krishna. Bas. I'll responsibly take care of all those other things after I chant. This is my time to be with Krishna. And it takes that kind of commitment to actually chant and feel Krishna's presence in our lives. So let's do a few more verses and then we'll ask if you have any questions. So text 38. Dumen navrit kate vanir yata darsho malena cha yaton bena vrito karbas tata tenedham abritam. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of lust. So fire covered by smoke, you still get the benefit of the fire, even though there's some smoke, right? So that's considered the mode of goodness. Okay. And then a mirror covered by dust, you don't see yourself in the mirror, but you can at least see the mirror. So that's mode of passion. And child inside the womb of their mother can't see anything. Right? Totally restricted. That's compared to the mode of ignorance. So passion is better than ignorance. One time I heard that Srila Bhakti Saraswati Thakur joked that he said, I'm praying for the day my disciples will rise up to the mode of passion. So these are the different degrees of lust. And of course, we're trying to transcend that and be Krishna conscious. So then 39, avrittam jnanam etena jnanino nityavarina kama rupena kunteya dushparena lamena cha. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. And at the end of the purport, let me just check my notes here for a second. At the end of the purport, Prabhupada writes, while one enjoys sense gratification, could you imagine if we just fully accepted this one sentence? This is the last sentence in the purport. When one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually that so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. Okay, any questions or comments before we finish this chapter?
So Prabhuji, Srila Prabhupada in the previous shloka uses the analogy of trees, animals. So
Which
that's
shloka?
also the 3.39.
Okay, 3.39.
Sorry, 3.38.
8, yeah, okay, go ahead.
So that is also accepted because you were talking about the mode of goodness, mode of passion, and mode of ignorance. So does that also align the analogies that Prabhupada is using?
Well, Prabhupada is comparing the trees to the mode of ignorance because he says this stage, right, of living condition can be compared to that of trees. The trees are also living entities. They've been put in such condition of life, et cetera, et cetera. The covered mirror is compared. So the covered mirror is passion. So birds and beasts are compared to passion. And the smoke-covered fire is the mode of goodness compared to human beings in the sense that at least they have that opportunity. So yes, like you said, that's correct. That's why if we get into a place where there's a lot of trees, you should chant Hare Krishna, so the trees hear the holy name. Haridas Thakur says that he would go into the forest and chant loudly so that all the non-moving living entities could get the benefits of hearing the holy name. And I often wonder, like in Los Angeles, we've had that temple on Watsika Avenue since probably at least over 50 years. So, and devotees chant their rounds outside there. Devotees walk from their apartments to the temple. So those trees that line Watsika Avenue must be very, very greatly benefited. But they're constantly hearing the holy name. The devotees are going past the trees all day long, chanting Krishna's name.
So essentially, Krishna is talking about the outcome of an accumulation of different degrees of lust that causes you to take different bodies here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Very good. Other questions, comments?
In Sloka 39, why the word wise living entities pure consciousness becomes covered? This even unwise people also is covered by this lust tendency. Why is the word used here?
Which word are you questioning? Pure consciousness?
That's the wise. The first in that translation.
Oh, that's the wise living entities. Because he's saying that even if you're a Gyanina, if you look at the word for word, even if you're very knowledgeable and pure, lust can mess you up, right? How many examples are there in the world of someone in a big position has everything they want in the world, and because of lust they become ruined, right?
Oh, that means even the wise, so not to speak of the unwise.
Yeah. But also in our pure consciousness we are all wise. Originally, as Prabhupada begins his famous speech on the chanting of Hare Krishna as living spirit souls, we are originally Krishna conscious beings, but due to our association with matter since time immemorial, we are now covered by illusory energy. Maybe you remember that. Okay, so let us now learn when one fears their enemy, we have to discover where to find the enemy. And Krishna now is going to explain that. Text 40. Indriyani manobudhir asya drishtanam uchate. Etar vimohayat yesha jnana avrita dehina. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So in the beginning of the purport, Prabhupada writes that the enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul. And therefore, Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. The mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, right? Before we act, the mind says, oh, that smells good. Let me see what it is. That looks really good. The senses, the eye, in one sense, you could say, is neutral, but the mind interprets what one sees through the eyes. Even the smell of something, you could say, in one sense, is neutral, but then the mind has categorized, yes, rose, nice smell, garbage, bad smell. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, and thus when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. As a result, the mind and the senses become repositories of lust. Again, I can't remember what it's like in India, but here in Washington, D.C., we have this huge reservoir, and all the water for the city of Washington, D.C. comes from that reservoir. So it is the complete amount of all the water in the area. So so it holds all the water. So here, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. It's kind of a nice visualization. So why is lust the greatest enemy? Because it covers our knowledge of even mundane knowledge, but especially knowledge of the absolute truth. And that's important because, as we learned in verse 28 of this chapter, that knowledge is what makes a difference between working for Krishna and working for fruitive results. So then, text 41. Tasmatvam indriyan yatau niyamya bharatarsabha pap manam prajahi hyenam jnana vijnana nashanam. Therefore, Arjuna, O best of the Paratas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses and slay the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. So Prabhupada's first sentence says, the Lord advised Arjuna to regulate the senses from the very beginning so that he could curb the greatest sinful enemy, lust, which destroys the urge for self-realization and specific knowledge of the self. So of the three, the senses are the easiest because they're the grossest. So in other words, you may have lusty desires, this and that, but if you still get up in the morning, take a shower, pick up your japa beads, right? The senses engaged in service is the first place to go. And then at the end of the purport, last paragraph, Prabhupada writes, lust is only the perverted reflection of love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. I'm sure that's what you and I are experiencing every day in our life. We're trying to do our sadhana, we're trying to be good, and we don't always remember Krishna. It's very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulated principles of devotional service. So from any stage of life, or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness, devotional service of the Lord, and turn the lust into love of Godhead, the highest perfectional stage of human life. So some of us may lament, oh, I wasted my teenage years. I did this nonsense. I did that. I did this. But even if we're a late beginner, we can become a lover of God from any stage of life or from the time of understanding its urgency. That's in the Bhagavatam, Kadvanga Maharaj, right? He had gotten a boon from the demigods that he could ask any question. He asked, when am I going to die? And they said, very soon. So he immediately became a lover of God very quickly. He just totally surrendered, knowing that his death was imminent. Okay, so that's 40. Let's do two more and then we'll take questions. 42. Indriyani paranyahur indriyebhya paramana manasastu para bhakti buddhir yo buddhe paratastu sam. The working senses are superior to dull matter. The mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Prabhupada writes that if therefore, this is about towards the end of the first paragraph and then the second paragraph. If therefore the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance of the senses being engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained, param dristva nivartate. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of it being engaged in lower propensities. And then in the last paragraph, beautiful writing. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. So with our intelligence, with what we're hearing in Bhagavad Gita, we understand I'm Krishna's servant. That's my constitutional position. And then I engage my mind in being Krishna's servant. That solves the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness by complete surrender into the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even though the senses are very strong, like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of the intelligence and mind and the senses also, still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna and Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. Imagine if you saw a python, no, not a python, a cobra, but you knew that they had no fangs. They couldn't harm you. You still might be a little scared, right? Because they're I don't know if you've ever seen cobras, but they're really powerful looking entities. I've seen them in Vrindavan. But it would be very, if you knew they couldn't hurt you, it would be a different experience, although you still might be scared. Okay, one more verse in this chapter. Evam buddhe param bhutva samstadyatmanam atmana jahi shatru mahabaho kama rupam durasadham. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, O mighty Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable energy known as lust. Prabhupada writes, desire for overlording and for sense gratification is the greatest enemy of the conditioned soul, but by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. So in this chapter, it has a nice segue into the next chapter, because it talks about, Krishna has spoken about how transcendental knowledge is what elevates us in consciousness. To remember to do our duty, but in a detached way. And it also raises us to the mode of goodness. So now in this verse, Krishna has certified transcendental knowledge as being able to give our intelligence the strength to overcome mundane desires. So now, after hearing the benefits of transcendental knowledge, it makes sense that that's the title of the next chapter. And Krishna will glorify transcendental knowledge. Okay, so comments, thoughts, questions?
One very fundamental doubt. What's the difference between mind and intelligence?
The difference between mind and intelligence, good question. So let's say, what's that?
They're not same.
They're not same, no, not at all. Very different. The mind might say, oh, I want to have a cigarette. And the intelligence says, it'll kill you. That's the difference between the mind and the intelligence. The mind, it's very binary. It's almost like, in computers, you have zeros and one. It's called sankalpa, vikalpa. It accepts and rejects. It accepts things that it looks like will give me enjoyment. It rejects things that I don't think will give me enjoyment. And it's very, 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 very fickle. Now, intelligence, if intelligence is controlled by Bhagavad Gita, or even just is functioning properly, it will tell us, oh, no, you shouldn't do that. Even though you think, drinking all that alcohol will make you happy and will make you forget some of your miseries. The intelligence will say, no, don't you remember how you feel the next day? And often what happens is the mind defeats the intelligence. The mind is so chalu, so tricky, right? It'll say, like, for example, let's say you're trying to lose weight. So the mind will say, so the intelligence say, no, don't have that second gulab jamun. And the mind will say, no, starting tomorrow, I will be really paka. Or I've been so good for so long, I can enjoy a little bit now. It'll come up with so many excuses and defeat the mind. And there you go, 3 more gulab jamuns or jalebis or whatever. Right? So the intelligence it's in Kali Yuga, our intelligence is not so strong. Now, some of you may have really good intelligence and you can control yourself, you can control your senses, right? The eyes want to see a pretty person or a handsome person of the opposite sex. And the intelligence says, do not look, no, right? Or you see something that really looks delicious, but it has some onions in it. You say, very few onions, right? But the intelligence, no, don't do that. So that's the difference between the intelligence and the mind. And the mind is meant to be controlled by intelligence.
Yes.
Okay?
Mind, it desires everything, and only intelligence controls it.
What was that? Say it again. The first part, the mind, what?
Desires.
Desires. Yeah, you can say that. Yes, mind desires. And the intelligence. Now you see, Prabhupada writes that if the intelligence is lusty, then it's he compared it to I don't know, do you in South India do you use the word chokidar?
Chokidar.
Yes, no?
South
No,
Indian,
chokidar in Hindi means a guard, right? Someone who's guarding your house. So if the guard is corrupt and brings their friends to steal things from your house, that's compared to an intelligence that, because you trust your intelligence, right? And you give that chokidar, that guard, your key, and then they steal everything from you when you're away. So we want to sharpen our intelligence by hearing Shastra, and then we want to have our mind follow our good intelligence.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's see, in the chat, we have a few points. Rajanath Prabhu says, in verse 41, the translation, Srila Prabhupada says, regulating senses. So are we to understand that we need to control all the three sitting places? Oh, no, that is the point. The point is the senses they need engagement. So we want to use our eyes to see the beautiful tea, to use our nose to smell the incense offered to the Lord, use our tongue to taste the prasadam and to chant Hare Krishna, like that. That's what regulating the senses is. Navadip Mataji says, can we say that the mind is a place of memories or recollection of experiences, but no discriminatory? That's one part of the mind, yes. But yes, you're right. The discrimination comes from the intelligence. But you're right. The mind has, like Prabhupada said, you have experience of gold and you have experience of a mountain, and you dream of a golden mountain. And the mind, the mind says so many things. So we need a good intelligence. But even more than the good intelligence, and it was mentioned in one of the purports, we need the param dristva. We actually need the higher taste. We need Krishna's blessings, because your intelligence is almost like willpower, and you only have so much willpower. You can't just go on year after year, usually on willpower alone, or by intelligence alone. We need to actually be experiencing the exchange of love between Krishna and ourselves. That gives us this higher taste. Then you're not interested in a lower taste anymore. Just like if I have I think I gave this example, right? If I have a Maruti 800, anyone, they still have those in India? Right? So I have a 2010 Maruti 800. If it's the only car I have, I take very, very nice care of it. Right? But if someone says, here's the keys to a new E-Class Mercedes-Benz, you don't even think about that Maruti anymore. Right? So if you get the higher taste of being with Krishna, you don't even think about sense gratification anymore. The mind is thinking about Krishna instead of accepting and rejecting according to the world. Let's see. Saidhanam says, intelligence and conscience. How do we differentiate? I think there's some similarities, because conscious means we know what's right, we know what's wrong. The intelligence is telling us what's right and what's wrong. Don't have that cigarette. But the mind says, my dear intelligence, Chela, I got this, right? So I think there's some similarities between the two. Murari Madhava Prabhu says, after liberation, will the soul lose subtle body, consisting of mind, intelligence, and falsity? Well, we have the real ego, who we really are. Well, our body is made of Sat, Chit, and Ananda. If you use the word liberation, but we're talking about entering into the spiritual world. Because mukti has different meanings for different people. So our body is made of Sat, Chit, and Ananda, not earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. Oh yes, Prabhupada said it'll be like, your question is, will the liberated soul loses all memories of previous births? Yes, it's just like a bad dream, Prabhupada said. A bad dream. Certainly you won't remember do you remember all your millions of other births right now? Right, Madhava Prabhu? No. So
no, Prabhu.
Yeah. But it's just like he said, it's like waking up from a bad dream when we enter the spiritual world.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. And if it is related to spiritual activities which we are doing in this body, after liberation, memories will be able to recall, like whatever the service or Guru Maharaj's association, all the spiritual activities what we do in this body, which is stored in the mind, these activities.
Well, I'm not sure. Those are all, everything we're doing right now is sadhana, which means practice, right? It's practice. That's, we're practicing. After sadhana comes bhava, and then comes prema, the three different stages in the nectar of devotion. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Prabhupada did say that there's an ISKCON in the spiritual world. And we do know that our relationship with Guru is eternal. But, whether you're going to remember that plate of prasadam that you gave to a coworker in August 18th, 2022, I don't know. You may be so busy doing so many wonderful things in the spiritual world, you're just like, yeah, whatever. Sumitra Gopal Prabhu says, sometimes we are able to dodge our mind with our intelligence, but sometimes when mind keep on pressing on certain things, even intelligence fall prey to it. Yes, I have that experience. Even if we don't want to do it, how to avoid it? Well, that's what Krishna just told us. We just read those verses, how to avoid it. We have to sharpen our intelligence. We need to get the higher taste. We need to get a higher taste and sharpen our intelligence. Get the association of strong devotees, reveal our minds to them, and have them also be our intelligence. Someone who loves you and trusts you says, don't take that cigarette. That usually has a deeper impression on us than if we tell ourselves, oh no, we shouldn't take that cigarette, or whatever example we want to use. So but you're right, the mind doesn't mind is very tricky. Mind doesn't just surrender easily. And the one way the mind does surrender is when we're in the mode of goodness. Then the mind can actually become peaceful. Shanti, shanti. And we can actually think clearly. And we're not running around, and we're just calm. Then we can see, then the mind will be our bandhur instead of our vipar, our friend.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I have a question. So really, to be in the mode of goodness, one needs to have a sustained sadhana. So even for a devotee, if we fluctuate between different modes, are we still considered devotees?
By the way, there's 10 things in the 11th canto, I don't know the verse right off mine, that affect what modes we're in. One is what we eat, what we drink, the time of day. Morning is more goodness, our association, and other things that we read about, whether are we reading the Times of India or are we reading the Bhagavatam, so your question is, are we, well, Navadvip Mataji, are you familiar with the difference between a light switch and a dimmer?
Yes.
Okay, so being devotees is more of a dimmer than a light switch. I'm a devotee, I'm not a devotee, I'm a devotee, I'm not a devotee. It's more like, just like we read in the Bhagavatam that there can be bhakti. We have karma mishra bhakti, jnana mishra bhakti, bhakti that has some mixture of karma, some mixture of jnana. We similarly have bhakti that's influenced by the mode of goodness, bhakti, and by passion, bhakti. So it's more like a dimmer. It's a spectrum, and so sometimes we're doing really well and we're focused, and it's more on this side, and sometimes we're just like shnik shnik giddy giddy ray ray shnik shnik giddy giddy ray ray Hare Krishna Hare Ram, and it's more that we're affected by, we're not acting so much in a devotional mood. So devotee means devotional. So I think we have a pretty good idea of when we are being devotional. When we're really trying to, Krishna, please engage me. We're chanting like a child calling out for its mother, as Prabhupada said. Is that all right?
That dimmer switch also includes Shuddha Sattva? Or is that a completely different switch altogether?
Well, no, it's just a different dimmer. You wouldn't call it a dimmer, you would call it like a, but there's 10 different stages of love of God, of prema.
Yes.
The top one being Radharani, you're not going to get there, Mahabhava. And Bhava is compared to Prem Ankur. It's the seed of Prema, and it's ecstasy. So, yeah, so it's a different.
So you've upgraded the switch, so to speak.
Yeah, everything is dire. Everything's kind of gradual, and you don't just wake up one day, boing. Right? Maybe at the time of death, it's like that, Yeah.
So we can say that only pure devotees are in the Shuddha Sattva state, not the sadhana bhaktas.
Oh, you're mixing nectar devotion with other things. Because first of all, what does pure devotee mean? One time Prabhupada was asked, how many pure devotees are there in ISKCON? And he said, how many devotees are there? He said, 5,000. 5,000 pure devotees. Because the green mango will one day become ripe. Right? And that's mentioned in the first canto, chapter 5, verses 17 and 19. Having once tasted, this is Narada Muni speaking, having once tasted Krishna consciousness, even if one falls down, one can't forget that taste. So what was your question though?
That only pure devotees are in the Shuddha Sattva state.
Depends on how we define pure devotees. Yeah, like I said, and Shuddha Sattva. I've heard that Prabhupada said that if you're in front of the deities and you're just looking and thinking only about the beauty of the deities, then you're performing pure devotional service. Anyabi lashita sunyam jnana karmana. And then if you start thinking, oh, what time is prasadam and this and that, you're not necessarily on that platform. So we can go up and down from that platform. We're practicing pure bhakti many times during the day. Okay.
Thank you, Prabhu.
All right, so chapter 4. Transcendental knowledge. Sri Bhagavan Vacha, Imam Vivashvate Yogam, Proktavam Aham Avyayam, Vivashvan Manave Prabhu, Taha, Manur Ikshakate Pravit. The personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god Vivashvan. And Vivashvan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku. The end of the first paragraph, Prabhupada writes, in other words, the executive heads of all states are intended to spread the science of Krishna consciousness so that people may take advantage of this great science and pursue a successful path, utilizing the opportunity of the human form of life. And then at the very end of the purport, since the Vedic instructions are accepted as they are without human interpretation, the Gita must therefore be accepted without mundane interpretation. The mundane wranglers may speculate on the Gita in their own ways. That is not Bhagavad Gita as it is. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita has to be accepted as it is from the disciplic succession. And it is described herein that the Lord spoke to the sun god spoke to his son Manu, Manu spoke to his son Ikshvaku. So, and it seems that when Prabhupada talks about other versions of the Gita, he specifically means those versions that do not accept bhakti as the supreme path. They may be very good Sanskrit. They may, do the word for word very, very carefully. And even Prabhupada himself used, before he translated the Gita, he used Radha Krishnan's translation, and he said it's 80 to 85% accurate, something along those lines. So it's not just the Sanskrit, it is understanding the author and the mood of the author and the purpose of the author. Okay. Text 2, very famous verse. Evam parampara praptam imam raja shayobidu sakalineha mahata yoga nashta parantapa. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. And so Prabhupada, just what I had just spoken about, he said, in the same way, at the present moment, there are so many editions of the Gita, especially in English, but almost all of them are not according to authorized disciplic succession. And a little later, since there is a great need of an edition of the Gita in English, as it is received by the Parampara disciplic succession system, an attempt is made herewith to fulfill this great want. Bhagavad Gita, accepted as it is a great boon for humanity. But if it is accepted as a treatise of philosophical speculation, it is simply a waste of time. So verse number 3, Saeva yamaya tedya yoga prokta paratan, bhaktosi me sakacheti, rahasyam driyatat uttamam. That very ancient science of the relationship with the Supreme is today told by me to you because you are my devotee as well as my friend. And can therefore understand the transcendental mystery of this science. So Prabhupada would quote this verse a lot, especially the third line, Bhaktosi me sakacheti, because he said that this was the qualification for understanding the Gita. You are my devotee, Bhaktosi me sakha, and my friend. So that intimate relation, then you can understand the transcendental mystery of the science. It's not just an academic process, it's a descending mercy. Someone could be the best Sanskrit scholar in the world and know all the sandhis and everything, and still not get the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita. if they're not bhaktosi me sakacheti. So only a devotee with devotion. So now I want to make that point, not just somebody wearing tilak and a dhoti or sari, but a person with devotion, only a person with devotion can understand Krishna. Others cannot, because our relationship with Krishna is also mentioned here, rahasya. It's secret, it's confidential, it's mysterious even. And Maya has covered our real identity. And Krishna, he doesn't have an inclination to remove the covering for anyone other than someone who has devotion. Okay? So it's Krishna's saying here, it is what's the word? It's through revelation. That we understand Krishna. It's through mercy that we understand Krishna. We're dealing with a person, Krishna. So any questions on those 3 verses? Comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, I have a question.
Yes, Prabhu.
Prabhuji, we understand that Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, and you have mentioned that shloka bhaktosmi sakacheti. But what was the reason Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita to Sun God? Is it because the Sun God is spreading the light throughout the universe, and this knowledge is?
Oh no, that was a long time ago, right?
Yes, 12 crores. Yes,
Yeah, long time ago. So I don't know. Maybe I have no idea. Maybe he was in Maya. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was the exact same words, but it was the, because like some words in the Bhagavad Gita are kind of very specific to Arjuna. Right? Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mamanusmar yudyacha. So remember me and fight. And I don't know if the sun god was in a fight at that time. Right? So I'm not sure.
Thank you, Prabhu.
That's a question. Prabhu, in 46 years, I've never heard that question before. Very good. Where are you, Madhava Prabhu?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. I wanted to know why Arjuna was only selected to hear Bhagavad Gita. All other 5 Pandavas, they are also highly qualified, and particularly Yudhishthir Maharaj was a very pious, learned devotee, and Bhimasen also. And is that necessary that somebody should be Sakha also here to hear this Bhagavad Gita? And I think Prabhuji asked why Sun God was selected. I think as far I remember, Lord Krishna says this knowledge is given to the kings, the ruling class, and the Sun God was actually the ruler actually, and
that's a good explanation.
Descendants, all the kings from the Surya Vamsha, actually it was passed on. It was given to him, I think maybe because he was also a ruler at that time.
That's very good. That's a good explanation. As for the first part, Yudhishthira was great. He had some, he made some mistakes himself, right? And that's devotees make mistakes. But sometimes we saw that he was more attached to the truth than following Krishna, right? I mean, we don't have to get here and put down Yudhishthira or Bhima, but we can glorify Arjuna that here it's said that he's a great devotee and a friend. So that's why Krishna chose him. Now, why he chose him rather than the other 2, I don't remember any references for that. But I greatly appreciate your point, the reference that you're giving about the sun and the Surya Vamsha and the fact that they were rulers. And Bhagavad Gita, in one sense, is great information for someone who is a ruler. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
All right. Okay, anything else? So then we were on verse number 4. Arjuna Uvacha, Aparam Bhavato Janma, Param Janma Vivashvataha, Katam Etad Viganiyam, Tvam Ado Bhaktavan Iti. So I have a doubt, says Arjuna. The sun god, Vivishwan, he's senior to you by birth. How am I to understand that at the beginning you instructed this science to him? How's that possible? Because Krishna just explained, you give transcendental knowledge through the parampara, and because Vivishwan is thousands of years old and Krishna is Arjuna's contemporary, how could Krishna have possibly instructed the science to Vivishwan many thousands of years before? Krishna's going to answer in verse number 5. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Bahuni Mevyatitani Janmani Tavacharjuna, Tanyaham Veda Sarvani, Natvam Veta Parantaha. The personality of God had said, many, many births, both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot, O subduer of the enemy. Towards the end of in the middle of Prabhupada writes, but the difference between the Lord and Arjuna is that the Lord remembered the incident, whereas Arjuna could not remember. That is the difference between the part and parcel living entity and the Supreme Lord. Therefore, a living entity a little later, however great he may be in the material explanation, can never equal Supreme Lord. And therefore, I remember Prabhupada said, for a devotee, even Lord Brahma is no more significant than an ant. Now, of course, he's not talking about Brahma, the head of our sampradaya in that sense, but just that big position. Because a devotee, in one sense, we're not enamored, overwhelmed by the big people of this world. Now, of course, for spreading Krishna consciousness, we do things like that. I can remember when I was living in India, I would spend a pretty good amount of time with L.K. Advani. Advani, is that his name? He was a big person. He was the home minister at the time. But that was to try to, encourage him in Krishna consciousness. I remember, I forget the actor who played Krishna in the Mahabharata. So one time he came to Vrindavan and all the devotees were like, oh, Prabhuji, but really, we understand, actually, big people with tons of money, beautiful looks, fame, they suffer just as much as or more than we do. Yeah, and they have all kinds of troubles that look, it externally looks very attractive. So here, there's a big difference between Krishna and Arjuna. Therefore, a living entity, however great he may be in material estimation, cannot be equal to the Supreme Lord. Okay. Anyone know the name of that actor who played Krishna?
Yes, Prabhuji. It was Nitish Bharadwaj, Prabhuji.
What was his name?
Nitish Bharadwaj.
I think that was, I don't remember. Because it was in Hindi and I didn't understand. At that time, I didn't understand any Hindi. So I was just like, hardball. Now, when George Harrison came to Vrindavan, I was like everybody else. Because also I became a devotee, a large part because of George Harrison, listening to his music. And just thinking, well, if one of the most famous people in the entire world at that time, the Beatles, is a devotee of Krishna, then it must be something good about this. Because he had all the money in the world that he needed, and still he was actually, Prabhupada really liked him a lot. Yeah. Okay, so number 6, Ajopi san avyayatma, Bhutanam ishvaropi san, Prakritim swam abhishtaya, Sambhavan yapma mayaya. Although I am unborn, and my transcendental body never deteriorates, and although I am the Lord of all living entities, by my material energy, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental form. In the beginning of the Purport Prabhupada says, the Lord has spoken about the peculiarity of his birth. Although he may appear like an ordinary person, he remembers everything of his many, many past births, whereas a common man cannot remember what he has done even a few hours before. So this ability, this remembrance, if you remember in the 15th chapter, Krishna says, I give people remembrance, forgetfulness, etc. But we can't remember our maybe a few people, very few people have some idea of their past life. There's these past life regressions and things. But for most of us, let's speak of 5 lifetimes ago or 10 lifetimes ago, forget it, not possible, right? But Krishna remembers all of his different times that he's come as an incarnation. Here the word, there's a few important words. The word Atma Maya, he uses that to explain his appearance. It means by my internal energy. So Krishna's birth is not regular, it's extraordinary. He doesn't appear by force, nor is he subject to the modes of nature. We should remember, we came into this world by force. We didn't have a choice. Right? We didn't say, I want to be born in this family in Bangalore with these parents and this, and right? We had no, because of our previous karma, we had choice in that sense, but we're here. Right? So it's significant that Krishna is, and of course, pure devotees and Krishna, they are the only people who don't come by force. Only Vishnu Tattva, and of course, great devotees like Srila Prabhupada. Besides that, everyone else comes by force. So therefore, this word Atma Maya is really important. Because Krishna's birth is extraordinary. He's not everyone's under the modes of material nature. Everyone. And Krishna's not. And Atma Maya also has another meaning. It also means by causeless mercy. And Prabhupada writes about this in the purport. He says, his appearance in his original form is his causeless mercy bestowed upon the living entities so that they can concentrate on the Supreme Lord as he is, and not on mental concoctions or imaginations, which the impersonalist wrongly thinks the Lord's form to be. The word Maya or Atma Maya refers to the Lord's causeless mercy, according to the Vishva Kosha dictionary. So Krishna appears by his mercy to fulfill his own desires and to uplift us. So Krishna, so even though he appears by that, he is on schedule, like the sun, just like we're coming to the 21st of June, which is the longest day of the year, right? The summer solstice. So Krishna, like the sun, he becomes visible, and then just like right now, it's dark here in Washington, DC, but I assume it's getting light where you are. Is that right? Is the sun out yet? Yes, no? Yes?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay. So, but no sun here. Look, dark. So, just it's sometimes explained like that Krishna appears in that way. And when he's here, then he disappears and goes to another place. He manifests to our vision unscheduled, and his body is aja, it's unborn, it's avyayam, without deterioration. His birth is not forced. Could you imagine? Excuse me. Having a body that has no deterioration. You don't get gray hairs. You don't get, rings around your eyes. You just are ever youthful. You don't go past 25 years old. Right? That's what Krishna is, right? So you see the difference between us and Krishna, even that one point. He's unborn. Okay, that maybe may not be able to figure out so well, but his body never deteriorates, and he's navayoganam. He's ever youthful. He doesn't get past 25. Ram Krishnan, are you past 25 years old?
Yes, Prabhu. Very much.
Could you imagine if you were still 25?
Mentally, yes.
Mentally, yes. Mine is very tricky in that sense. Yeah. So by that conclusion, I conclude you are not Krishna. You're a devotee of Krishna, yes, but you're not Krishna. Okay, so it's powerful. And at the end, Prabhupada writes that Krishna appears in this material world in his original eternal form with two hands holding a flute. He appears exactly in his eternal body, uncontaminated by this material world. Now, next verse, Krishna explains the reasons that he appears. A famous verse. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutanam adharmasya tadatmanam shridam aham. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice or descendant of Bharata and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. And towards the end of the second last paragraph, Prabhupada says that no one should be accepted as an avatara unless he is referred to by scriptures. It is not a fact that the Lord appears only on Indian soil. He can manifest himself anywhere and everywhere, and whenever he desires to appear. In each and every incarnation, he speaks as much religion as can be understood by the particular people under this particular circumstances. But the mission is the same, to lead people to God consciousness and obedience to the principles of religion. Sometimes he descends personally, and sometimes he sends his bona fide representative in the form of his son or servant or himself in some disguised form. So again, Krishna appears, or advents, he's not born. He only seems to take birth, but both these words, bhavati and srijami, they mean that Krishna becomes manifest. Prabhupada even writes that the word srijami is significant herein. Srijami cannot be used in the sense of creation because according to the previous verse, there is no creation of the Lord's form or body, since all of the forms are eternal existent. Therefore, srijami means the Lord manifests himself as he is. So then the next question is, why does he come? What does he do? And this verse, I once saw this verse in Sanskrit outside of the police station in Mathura. I thought it was pretty funny. Parichanaya sadhunam vinashaya cha duskritam dharma samsa panarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. To deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to reestablish the principles of religion, I appear millennium after millennium. And what's really important here is this very devotional point. And I'll read, there's two places in Prabhupada's purports where he talks about this. First, he says in the first paragraph, as far as the atheistic are concerned, it is not necessary for the Supreme Lord to appear as he is to destroy them, as he did with the demons Ravana and Kamsa. The Lord has many agents who are quite competent to vanquish demons, so like hurricanes and tornadoes and COVID. But the Lord especially descends to appease his unalloyed devotees. And then later, Lord Krishna descends for the specific purpose of mitigating the anxieties of the pure devotees who are very anxious to see him in his original Vrindavan pastimes. Therefore, the prime purpose of the Krishna avatar is to satisfy his unalloyed devotees. Right? So that's the main reason Krishna comes, to satisfy his devotees. Okay, I want to do 2 more verses, and then we'll see questions, then we'll end for the day. So verse 9 is also super famous. Janma karma chame divyam evam yove titafataha taktva deham punar janma naiti mam eti Arjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. In the third sentence, Prabhupada says that such liberation of the living entity from material bondage is not at all easy. The impersonalists and the yogis attain liberation only after much trouble and many, many births. Even then, the liberation they achieve, merging into the impersonal Brahmajyoti of the Lord, is only partial, and there is a risk of returning to this material world. But the devotee, simply by understanding the transcendental nature of the body and activities of the Lord, attains the abode of the Lord after ending this body and does not run the risk of returning to this material world. So the question always comes up, what does it mean to know the transcendental nature? Well, because we all theoretically know it, right? We all say, no, Krishna's body is eternal. All right, I go back to Godhead now. Obviously, there's something more to it than that. It's acting on that platform. It's getting realization by Krishna's mercy of Krishna's transcendental nature. Now, there's something in the chat. Murari Madhava says, what is the proper understanding we should have on the word dharma in this shloka? Which shloka was that, Murari Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. See, this yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavat.
Oh, that one, okay.
Which you quoted from.
Oh, so text 7. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata apyutanamatam. And your question is, what's the proper understanding of the word dharma in this shloka? Well, Prabhupada actually talks about this a lot in the purport. Therefore, the principles of dharma or religion are the direct, well, let's go back a little bit. Principles of religion are laid down in the Vedas. And any discrepancy in the matter of properly executing the rules of the Vedas makes one irreligious. In the Bhagavatam, it is stated that such principles are the laws of the Lord. Only the Lord can manufacture a system of religion. The Vedas are also accepted as originally spoken by the Lord himself to Brahma from within his heart. Therefore, the principles of dharma or religion are the direct orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Dharman tu shakshat bhagavat pranitam. These principles are clearly indicated throughout the Bhagavad Gita. The purpose of the Vedas is to establish such principles under the orders of the Supreme Lord. So let's look at that verse. Dharmam tu shakshat bhagavat pranitam navai vidur rishayo na pidevaha. Nasiddha mukya asura manusya kutascha vidyadhara charanadayaha. Real religious, this is from 6.3.19 of the Bhagavatam. Real religious principles are enacted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Although fully situated in the mode of goodness, even the great rishis who occupy the topmost planets cannot ascertain the real religious principles, nor can the demigods or the leaders of Siddhaloka, to say nothing of asuras, ordinary human beings, vidyadharas, and charanas. And then the next verse in that 6th canto is very famous. It lists the 12 Mahajans, Swayambhur, Narada, Shambhu, etc. So your question again is understanding of Dharma in this verse. This is a higher, there are different levels of Dharma. Sometimes it's used in terms of just like mundane occupation, right? But here, Dharman Tushakshat Bhagavat, this is the Dharma that's given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. So ultimately, it's devotional. As Rajanath has said very nicely. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Now I have to go back to where we were. So we did 7, 8, 9. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to say about 9. No, but this is also, when you think about it, this is glorifying transcendental knowledge, that the result of realizing transcendental knowledge is you go back to Godhead. So the result of going beyond knowledge of Krishna to a state of absorption in Krishna is this last verse. Vitaraga bhaya krodha manmaya mam upasritaha bhavo jnana tapasa puta mahadbhavam agataha. Being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in me, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me, and thus they all attained transcendental love for me. Okay. There's a very powerful few sentences in the middle of this purport. Begins with, this is a kind of fearful stage of life, devoid of perfect knowledge of spiritual existence. Furthermore, there are many persons who cannot understand spiritual existence at all. Being embarrassed by so many theories and by contradictions of various types of philosophical speculations, they become disgusted or angry and foolish conclude that there is no supreme cause and that everything is ultimately void. Such people are in a diseased condition of life. Some people are too materially attached and therefore do not give attention to spiritual life, right? They're just so absorbed in stuff. Some of them want to merge into the supreme spiritual existence. That's another thing, like a Mayavadi. And some of them just believe in everything, being angry at all sorts of spiritual speculations out of hopelessness. This last class of men take to the shelter of some kind of intoxications, and the resultant hallucinations are sometimes accepted as spiritual vision. And Prabhupada saw that a lot in some of the hippies and things in the early days. So here this sentence is powerful. One has to get rid of all 3 stages of material consciousness. Attachment to material life, fear of a spiritual personal identity, and the conception of void that arises from frustration in life. To get free from these 3 stages of the material concept of life, one has to take complete shelter of the Supreme Lord, guided by the bona fide spiritual master, and follow the disciplines and regulated principles of devotional life. So, powerful purport. So first you get knowledge, and then you get love. Beyond liberation is there's this stage of love of Krishna, puta madbhavam agatam. But without being purified by knowledge of Krishna, how are we going to get absorbed in him? We have to hear about him. We have to hear about him. We have to hear about him. So, any last questions or comments?
This in this verse 4.9, one who knows the mind transcendent nature, I mean appearance and activities, doesn't upon leaving the body take birth again. Is it applicable to all of us, Prabhu? All our devotees, all know the transcendental nature of the Lord. Can we claim so? Or it has to be read in conjunction with 7:19, where such Mahatmas or Durlabha or Bhagavan ends. Is it? Are we? Where do we fit it?
I think I addressed this. I said that question always comes up, and it's obviously. I mean, it's about realizing that knowledge, not just saying yes, Krishna has a transcendental body. He's unborn. He's eternal. He's ever existing. He Angani Yasya Sakalandriya. He can with one sense he can do other things. Then I'm liberated. Well, yeah, but do I focus on Krishna's beauty every day? Do I think about Krishna constantly? Do I are my activities in life devotional? So it's a whole package. It's not just the understanding the theory. Okay.
Yes, Prabhu. So it's very rare.
So, yeah, it's a little rare, yeah, but by Lord Chaitanya's mercy, he's made it readily available. Otherwise, generally, it's very rare. So I don't know if we'll actually do that, but I would like you to complete this chapter. It's verses 11 to 34, I believe it is. So that's 23 verses. We covered 17 verses today, I believe. So that would be more, but not that much more. But that would be the homework, and of course, carry out whatever is in your homework assignment booklet. So I have to take rest. How does that sound?
Yes, please.
So thank you very much, everyone. Bancha kalpa tarubhyas chakri pasanubhyeva chabatitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo.
Vaishnavebhyo namo namah.
Haribo.